Class D airspace. Class D airspace is controlled airspace starting at the surface of airports, having an operating control tower. Figure 25 shows its dimensions. It's established to help air traffic controllers provide an orderly flow of traffic taking off or landing at airports within this airspace. The blue dashed line surrounding Chico Airport in Figure 26, Position 1, represents the lateral dimensions of Class D airspace. The radius of Class D airspace varies with individual airports and is individually tailored to the instrument approach procedure for which the controlled Class D airspace is established. It usually, however, averages approximately 4.3 nautical miles, or 5 statute miles. The top of the airspace cylinder generally extends to heights of approximately 2,500 feet AGL. The height also varies depending on local needs. Position 2 in Figure 26 identifies the actual top of Class D airspace in hundreds of feet above sea level, as shown by the bracketed value of 27, standing for 2,700 feet MSL. As you can see, the 2,700-foot MSL top of Chico's Class D airspace is approximately 2,500 feet above its elevation of 238 feet MSL. Class D airspace is established at airports having sufficient traffic to justify the presence of a control tower. Normally, numerous general aviation aeroplanes are found taking off or landing at the primary airport within this airspace. The primary airport, shown in Figure 26, Position 3, the one with the control tower, is usually found at the center of the blue dashed circle. This doesn't mean you won't find the occasional larger aircraft, shark or whale, at this airport. It does mean, however, that there may be quite a few smaller airplanes, in other words goldfish, in the vicinity. All aircraft operating within Class D airspace are required to establish and maintain two-way radio communication prior to entering and when operating within this airspace. In other words, you must talk to the control tower before taking off, landing, or flying through this airspace. Of course, if you overfly Chico Airport at more than 2,700 feet MSL, or operate beyond the lateral limits of the blue dashed line, you're not in Class D airspace, and no communication is required. See Chapter 6, FAR 91.129, for the precise definition of establishing and maintaining communications. Chico Airport, Figure 26, Position 3, is solid blue in color. This identifies the airport as having a control tower. Remembering this is easy. Since blue is the color your face usually turns when you're attempting to understand what fast-talking controllers are saying. Communication with the air traffic controller is made on the frequency of 121.0 MHz, shown next to the symbol CT, standing for Control Tower. Realize that Class D airspace only exists when the control tower is operating. This means the control tower has someone in it. After all, there's no way you can establish communications without controllers. The night cleaning staff will not answer your calls. When the tower shuts down, the airport is treated like a non-tower, uncontrolled airport. Figure 27 shows an excerpt from the AFD for Chico Airport. Class D airspace is effective from 1500 to 0300 UTC. This is the same as the operating hours of Chico's control tower, 0700 to 1900 local time, as shown on the Aeronautical Sectional Charts side panel in Figure 28. According to the AFD, reference Figure 27.C, when Class D airspace is not in effect, the airspace reverts to Class G airspace. Figure 29 identifies the Class E airspace extensions added onto Class D airspace. As I've mentioned before, Extensions of Class E airspace are added when it's necessary to keep IFR aeroplanes in controlled airspace during their instrument approaches.
Tower controllers give the impression of being pretty serious, yet most of them have a great sense of humor. For instance, one of our airport's more senior pilots had his false teeth fall out during a landing. He sneezed and flared at the same time, and blew his teeth out of his mouth. The tower called, but he couldn't reply. He finally got his teeth back in and said,
"Well, Santa Monica Tower, I'm sorry about the delayed response, but my teeth fell out on landing."
The controller said, "Well, you might think about pulling back on the wheel a little sooner next time. And make sure you stay away from those Coke machines, okay?"
Weather minimums for Class D airspace. The weather minimums for Class D airspace are exactly the same as they are for Class E airspace below 10,000 feet MSL. Therefore, Rod Machado's Airspace Simplification Rule Number 2 applies here. You need to maintain the VFR minimums of 3V/152, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above any clouds, 500 feet below clouds, 2,000 feet laterally from clouds while airborne. Since Class D airspace is surface-based controlled airspace, Rod Machado's Airspace Simplification Rule Number 3 also applies. Taking off, landing, or operating in the traffic pattern of an airport having any type of surface-based controlled airspace established for it requires a minimum of 3V/1C, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 foot ceiling. As with Class E airspace, this is reported ground visibility. When it's not reported, the pilot must maintain at least 3 statute miles flight visibility. If weather conditions at that airport are less than 3 miles reported ground visibility or less than a 1,000 foot ceiling, if a ceiling exists, a special VFR clearance is required before taking off, landing, or entering the traffic pattern within the surface-based portion of Class D's airspace and its Class E extension. During the day, you can usually tell if the primary airport is below basic VFR minimums by looking at the airport's rotating beacon. The beacon, which flashes white and green as it rotates, is normally activated at night to help identify an airport with runway lights. When it's activated during the day, it means that an existing ceiling is less than 1,000 feet, or the visibility is less than 3 miles, or both. Either way, a special VFR clearance, or an IFR clearance if IFR rated, is required to operate into or out of the surface-based controlled airspace under these conditions. Satellite airports within Class D airspace. On occasion, another airport lies within the lateral boundaries of Class D airspace as shown in Figure 30. Martha Lake Airport, Position 1, an uncontrolled airport, lies within the Class D airspace for Snohomish County Airport, Position 2. If you're landing at Martha Lake, you need to establish and maintain two-way radio communication with the primary airport, Snohomish Tower, prior to entering Class D airspace. If you're taking off from Martha Lake Airport, you must establish contact with Snohomish Tower as soon as practicable after departing. Sometimes a special arrangement is made with the control tower concerning satellite airports within its Class D airspace. This provision is known as a letter of agreement. It's somewhat like a prenuptial agreement that attempts to prevent the uppercuts, headlocks, and general mayhem associated with divorce hearings. For example, a letter of agreement with the tower might allow pilots from a particular flight school at a satellite airport to take off or land in a specific direction without first establishing communications with the tower. Unless you know that you are covered by this procedure, you should always establish and maintain two-way radio communications with the tower prior to entering Class D airspace. Class C airspace. Smaller jet-type aircraft, sharks, as well as propeller-driven aircraft, goldfish, are normally found in Class C airspace. Radar controllers are available to ensure traffic separation between this mixture of fast and slow IFR and VFR aircraft. An operating control tower, as in Class D airspace, as well as radar approach control services, are associated with the existence of Class C airspace. Figure 31 shows the typical dimensions of this airspace. Class C airspace is geometrically shaped like two cylinders, a larger one on top of a smaller one, the double tuna can if you remember. The surface-based inner cylinder, the core surface area, extends upward to approximately 4,000 feet AGL and has a 5 nautical mile radius from the center of the primary airport. The upper cylinder, the shelf area, normally begins at 1,200 feet AGL and has a 10 nautical mile radius from the center of the primary airport. The upper limit of the top cylinder is generally found at 4,000 feet above the elevation of the primary airport. Remember, the Class C airspace fish tank is larger because it must hold sharks as well as goldfish. Dimensions of Class C airspace may vary depending on local terrain and traffic considerations. Class C airspace is depicted on an aeronautical sectional chart by solid magenta rings surrounding the primary airport, as shown in Figure 32. Beale Air Force Base is the primary airport in this case. Positions 2 and 3 show both the inner and outer cylinders of this airspace. Elevation numbers, positions 4 and 5, show that the two sections of the outer cylinder start at 2,600 feet and 1,600 feet MSL respectively, and extend vertically to 4,100 feet MSL. That's approximately 4,000 feet above Beale's airport elevation of 113 feet MSL. Operating anywhere within the boundaries of Class C airspace requires that you establish and maintain communication with the appropriate ATC facility, usually approach control, prior to entering this airspace. ATC provides basic radar service, sequencing, and separation between VFR and IFR aircraft. It also provides the same service within a 20 nautical mile radius of the primary airport, often defined as the outer area. A mixture of faster and slower aircraft is common in Class C airspace. Because of higher terrain east of the airport, a section of the outer cylinder begins at a higher MSL altitude, reference position 4. Yet it's still approximately 1,200 feet AGL. The inner cylinder elevation limits, position 6, extend from the surface, SFC, to 4,100 feet MSL. Figure 33 shows a 3D view of Beale's Class C airspace. Equipment requirements to operate within Class C airspace. If you are planning on entering Class C airspace to land at any airport within the cylinder or to fly through the area, you must establish and maintain two-way radio communication with the appropriate ATC facility prior to entering this airspace. The facility you must communicate with is the one providing air traffic services for that airspace. Normally, this will be the local approach control facility for that area. Position 1 in Figure 32 shows the frequencies for the ATC facility having jurisdiction over this airspace. Two-way radio communication is required in Class C as well as Class D airspace. In addition, operations within Class C airspace require a transponder with Mode C capability. This transponder requirement also applies if you are flying anywhere above the ceiling and within the lateral boundaries of Class C airspace upward to 10,000 feet MSL. In other words, even though you're above the top of Class C airspace, as long as you are within its lateral boundaries and below 10,000 feet MSL, you need a transponder with an encoding altimeter. This helps keep ATC aware of the potential traffic conflicts as pilots exit and enter the top of Class C airspace. Class C Service. Within Class C airspace, you'll receive Class C service. It's really first-class service for Class C airspace. It means ATC provides you with basic radar service, sequencing to the primary airport, and separation of VFR aircraft from IFR aircraft.
Although not shown on the sectional chart, there is an imagined outer area to Class C airspace that's assumed to extend to a 20 nautical mile radius from the primary airport. It's considered good operating practice, although not mandatory, to contact the approach control facility within 20 nautical miles of the primary airport. This gives the controller more time for sequencing and separating you from IFR aircraft. An aircraft doesn't need to be operating in the clouds to be considered an IFR aircraft. It need only be on an IFR flight plan, regardless of the weather conditions. IFR aircraft are in constant contact with ATC, and these are the aircraft Class C service sequences you with and separates you from.
Let's assume you're departing the primary airport within Class C airspace. Obviously, you must establish and maintain two-way radio communication with a control tower, just as you did in Class D airspace. After departure, you must communicate as instructed by ATC while operating within this airspace. This means you'll probably be handed off from the tower to departure control when leaving the airport. The tower might say, Cessna 2132 Bravo, contact Bay Departure Control on 121.3. When departing the primary airport in Class C airspace, the ATIS will often require you to contact clearance delivery for departure instructions. Normally, you will be given the departure control frequency, a transponder squawk code, and instructions on how to depart the area, such as a heading or a route to be flown. Satellite airports within Class C airspace. Figure 32, position 7, shows that Hamilton Airport is an uncontrolled satellite airport within the inner circle of Beale's Class C airspace. You can depart a satellite airport without an operating control tower if you establish and maintain two-way radio communications with the appropriate ATC facility, usually approach or departure control, as soon as possible after departing. In other words, you may take off and, as soon as it is feasible, contact Sacramento Approach Control on one of the frequencies shown in the red tabbed box, position 1. Variations in Class C airspace. Figure 34 shows Class C airspace for Santa Barbara Airport. A portion of the outer cylinder on the eastern side of Santa Barbara's Class C airspace is missing. No, this has nothing to do with UFO cattle mutilations. Steeply rising terrain east of the airport necessitated removal of this section. The inner cylinder of Santa Barbara's Class C airspace is controlled airspace touching the surface. As we've previously seen with surface-based Class E airspace, a keyhole extension is sometimes necessary to accommodate instrument pilots making approaches into the airport. An extension of Class E airspace, Position 1, is added onto the inner cylinder of Class C airspace at Santa Barbara, as shown in Figure 34. Within this small segment of the magenta-dashed line, Class E airspace extends from the surface upward to the overlying shelf of Class C airspace. The overlying shelf begins at 1,500 feet MSL in this case. Weather minimums for Class C airspace. The weather minimums for Class C airspace are exactly the same as they are for Class D airspace and Class E airspace below 10,000 feet MSL. Rod Machado's Airspace Simplification Rule No. 2 applies here. You need to maintain the VFR minimums of 3V/152 while airborne. Since Class C airspace is surface-based controlled airspace, Rod Machado's Airspace Simplification Rule No. 3 also applies. Taking off, landing, or operating in the traffic pattern of an airport having any type of surface-based controlled airspace established for it requires a minimum of 3V/1C. As with Class D and E surface-based airspace, a special VFR clearance is required if these minimums don't exist. If a special VFR clearance is necessary, contact Santa Barbara Clearance Delivery if on the ground, or Approach Control if airborne. This clearance allows operations below 10,000 feet MSL within the lateral boundaries of Class C surface area as shown by Position 2, not the boundaries of the upper cylinder, as well as to any Class D or E airspace extension, Position 1. As with all special VFR clearances, an ATC-issued altitude restriction supersedes the 10,000-foot MSL limit. An excerpt from the AFD, Figure 35, shows that Santa Barbara's Class C airspace is in operation from 1400 Zulu to 0700 Zulu. These are also the hours of operation of the control tower. Outside these times, the AFD says that Class E airspace exists at the airport. Therefore, there is always some type of surface-based controlled airspace existing at Santa Barbara. Class B airspace.
Now, boys, let's talk about where the whales swim. 747s, DC-10s, etc. Airports like Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, New York JFK, and others are home to these metallic sky mammals. Of course, Class B airspace is established to separate whales from each other, as well as any small goldfish or sharks that might swim with them during the takeoff or landing at the primary airport. Of course, when it comes to sharks, you know me, I just turn myself into a human obstacle. Well, my whole body's a weapon.
As we've already stated, the shape of Class B airspace has been likened to an inverted wedding cake. It usually starts with a circular-based surface area surrounding the primary airport. Ever-widening circular cylinders lie on top of lower cylinders, creating the inverted wedding cake, with a squished bride and groom appearance as shown in Figure 36. Class B airspace is designed to keep larger aircraft in a protective tank without unnecessarily restricting the movement of smaller aircraft below. Special extensions of the tank are nothing more than approach and departure paths into and out of the primary airport. These sections establish boundaries that prevent other aircraft from straying into the path of larger and faster aircraft. Typically, Class B airspace has a radius of 15 to 30 miles from the primary airport, and it extends vertically from the surface to 10,000 feet MSL. Figure 37 shows how Class B airspace for the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Position 1, is displayed on an aeronautical sectional chart. The boundaries of Class B airspace are defined by solid blue lines surrounding the primary airport, Position 2. Position 3 shows that Class B airspace in the innermost ring extends vertically from the surface, SFC, to 11,000 feet MSL. Dallas-Fort Worth's Class B airspace is a little taller than normal. Most Class B airspace extends to about 10,000 feet MSL. Position 4 shows another section where Class B airspace starts at 3,000 feet MSL and extends to 1,000 feet MSL. Position 5 shows a section starting at 5,000 feet MSL and extending vertically to 1,000 feet MSL. Sections of Class B airspace may vary in altitude and shape to accommodate arriving and departing aircraft, probably from airways or high-altitude transitions. An important thing to keep in mind is that the rings and segments of Class B airspace are often made up of DME arcs and/or radials or bearings from local navigation stations. DME, or distance measuring equipment, is an electronic instrument that tells you your distance from a navigation station, which is often a VOR. For instance, the 207-degree radial from the Maverick VOR, Position 6, makes up the line that identifies where the floor of Class B airspace changes from 4,000 feet to 3,000 feet on one of the inner rings. See the value circled in red at Position 7. The arcs or rings of Class B airspace are determined by distances from the Maverick VOR, Position 6. Since many aeroplanes have DME capability, pilots can tell their position relative to the individual rings of this Class B airspace. Requirements to enter Class B airspace. Now that you know what Class B airspace is and how it's depicted on an aeronautical sectional chart, you are inevitably curious about what it takes to swim with the big ones. First, in order to take off or land at an airport within this airspace, or to simply fly through this airspace, you must hold at least a private pilot's license. An exception exists for student and recreational pilots seeking private pilot certification who are given the instruction and appropriate logbook endorsement required by FAR 61.95. Second, an ATC clearance is required before operating in Class B airspace. This clearance must be obtained from the ATC facility having jurisdiction over that area. Normally, it's the local approach and departure control serving the primary airport. This assumes you'll have a two-way radio capable of communication with the appropriate ATC facility. The communication requirement for Class B airspace is different than the communication requirement for Class C or D airspace. While you need only establish and maintain communication for Class C or D airspace, you need to obtain a clearance to enter Class B airspace. In other words, if you contact the controller to enter Class C or D airspace, and that controller says, "Roger, 2132 Bravo, stand by," you've established communication. You can enter that airspace. If, however, the controller in charge of Class B airspace says, "Stand by," this is most definitely not a clearance. You must remain on the outside looking in until permission is granted to enter the tank. A typical clearance into Class B airspace will be:
Piper 2132 Bravo is cleared to enter Class B airspace via direct to the Los Angeles VOR, maintain 5,500 feet while in Class B airspace. Departing Class B airspace, Piper 2132 Bravo is cleared out of Class B airspace via radar vectors to Matwa intersection, climb and maintain 3,500 feet while in Class B airspace. The arrival clearance would probably be provided by approach control, and the departing clearance by clearance delivery or ground control. Sometimes controllers will clear you to an intersection on an airway as part of your clearance. The intersections, consisting of 5 letters, are usually shown on the aeronautical sectional chart. Matwa is the name of a typical intersection. One time, a pilot asked a controller, who was in a good mood, to call Matwa for him. In AvSpeak, a request to call something means, please tell me when I reach that spot, or when you want me to make that turn. Without hesitation, the controller said, here Matwa, here boy. Who said controllers don't have a sense of humor.
Third, a transponder with Mode C capability is also required. For IFR pilots, a VOR receiver is required when operating within this airspace. If, for any reason, the Class B airspace doesn't extend to 10,000 feet MSL, a transponder with Mode C capability is required when operating above the ceiling and within the lateral boundaries of Class B airspace. It's interesting to note that while Class B airspace is controlled airspace, it actually has slightly less stringent VFR weather minimums. You knew there had to be one exception, right? 3 miles visibility is still required within Class B airspace. However, you only need to remain clear of clouds instead of the typical 1,500 feet, 2,000 foot distance minimums. The reason for this is that all aircraft operating within this airspace are being sequenced and separated while under ATC control. There is little chance of another pilot popping out of a cloud and creating a collision threat to nearby aircraft. This cloud distance reduction prevents pilots from having to fly evasive headings, often to the surprise of ATC, while trying to maintain a minimum distance of 2,000 feet from any cloud. Special VFR within Class B airspace. Since Class B airspace is surface-based controlled airspace, Rod Machado's Airspace Simplification Rule number 3 applies. Taking off, landing, or operating in the traffic pattern of an airport having any type of surface-based controlled airspace requires a minimum of 3V/1C. A special VFR clearance is required if these minimums don't exist. Because of the high volume of traffic as well as the type of aircraft operating within Class B airspace, special VFR operations may be unavailable. Figure 38 shows the letters NOSVFR for the primary airport in Houston's Class B airspace. Pilots without an instrument rating would need to wait until VFR conditions existed at the airport before they would be permitted to take off or land. Corridors and circumnavigating Class B airspace. Because of the numerous aeroplanes in, near, and around Class B airspace, you should be cautious when circumnavigating this area. Pilots often elect to fly underneath the floors or individual shelves of Class B airspace, thus avoiding the need for an ATC clearance. To enhance the opportunity for seeing and avoiding other aircraft, a speed limit is established in these areas. FAR 19.117C requires that pilots not exceed 200 knots indicated airspeed while operating below the lateral limits or through a VFR corridor of Class B airspace area. At a few locations, a VFR corridor has been implemented to assist pilots transiting the Class B airspace. Figure 39 depicts the LAX VFR corridor. This opening or tunnel through the Class B airspace is called the Special Flight Rules Area. Basically, it is an exception to the Class B airspace, which allows pilots to fly either north or south directly over Los Angeles International Airport, without having to meet some of the operational requirements of Class B airspace. You don't need a clearance to use this corridor. You may need to meet other requirements, such as having a VFR terminal area chart, specific navigation equipment, etc. Just follow the requirements listed on the VFR terminal area chart for the area's Class B airspace. You'll learn more about terminal area charts in Chapter 10. More than one of these special routes may exist within the borders of Class B airspace. At the time of this writing, Los Angeles has 2 additional routes allowing passage through Class B airspace. Unlike the special flight area mentioned above, these require that you meet all the operational requirements of Class B airspace, in other words, FAR 91.131. Therefore, an ATC clearance is necessary, as well as minimum equipment and pilot qualifications. Transponder and Mode C within 30 nautical miles of certain airports. In addition to the requirement for a transponder with Mode C capability in Class A, B, and C airspace, FAR 91.215 also requires this equipment in other areas. Several airports listed in Appendix D, Section 1 of FAR Part 91, require a transponder with Mode C capability from the surface to 10,000 feet MSL when operating within 30 nautical miles of that airport. You can tell if an airport requires this by looking at the aeronautical sectional chart. You'll see a magenta-colored ring surrounding the primary airport listing this Mode C requirement as shown at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Figure 37, Position 8. The ring is slightly off-center from Dallas-Fort Worth's Class B airspace, because the Class B airspace is centered at the Maverick VOR, Position 6, while the ring is centered at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Position 1. Transponders and Mode C above 10,000 feet MSL. A transponder with Mode C is also required in all the airspace of the 48 contiguous United States and the District of Columbia when operating at and above 10,000 feet MSL, excluding the airspace at and below 2,500 feet AGL. If you're flying at or below 2,500 feet AGL above Mount Whitney, standing at 14,491 feet MSL, you don't need a transponder with Mode C, although you should bring a parka and mittens. Transponders in controlled airspace. If your aeroplane has a transponder, and most do, the rules require that it be turned on, including the Mode C capability, any time you are operating in controlled airspace. This is to be done even when it's not required by the specific type of airspace in which you're operating. You should use the code assigned by ATC or the VFR code 1200 when not in contact with ATC. Transponder and Mode C deviations. Occasionally, electrical equipment ceases to operate. It's possible that one day you might see a big puff of white smoke come from the transponder, and the inside of your cockpit could go to less than basic VFR minimums. The transponder has probably failed. According to FAR 91.215, if you have a transponder lacking Mode C capability, you can request a deviation to operate within airspace requiring Mode C at any time. Such a request is made with the ATC facility having jurisdiction over that airspace. Typically, the tower or approach control have jurisdiction. If you have a transponder that is temporarily inoperative, and you need to continue to your destination, just let the controller know of any intermediate stops you'll be making. He or she can OK the flight on the spot. If, however, your airplane doesn't have a transponder at all, a request must be submitted at least 1 hour in advance.
One day, an air traffic controller at Van Nuys Airport received a call from a hang glider using a handheld radio. This guy called up and said,
"Dude, check it out. Look, Van Nuys Tower, this is hang glider Bob of your airport, like for landing."
The controllers didn't know what else to do, so they cleared him to land in the grass beside the runway. Rod mentioned to his friend that they should be glad Rod wasn't in the tower at the time. His friend asked why. Rod said that he would have made him go around.
Speed restriction in Class C and D airspace. To help prevent faster aircraft from gobbling up goldfish, an additional speed restriction is applied to Class C and D airspace. When any aircraft is within 4 nautical miles of the primary airport in Class C and D airspace at or below 2,500 feet AGL, a 200-knot speed restriction applies. Terminal Radar Service Area. In Chapter 8, I briefly mentioned the Terminal Radar Service Area, TRSA. Let's fly by for a closer look at a type of airspace that's unusual by virtue of having nothing about it that's mandatory. Recall that in a TRSA, ATC provides sequencing and separation between all participating VFR aircraft. Figure 40 depicts a typical TRSA. Its boundaries are identified by a black line. TRSAs take on variable sizes and shapes, but they usually contain a surface-based layer around the primary airport with 1, 2, or more elevated cylinders of airspace. Altitudes for the different layers are shown within the individual rings as with Class B airspace. Suppose you're approaching Binghamton Airport and you want TRSA service. Refer back to Chapter 8 for more detail on TRSA service. You would refer to the Frequency tab on the edges of the aeronautical sectional chart to identify the appropriate approach control frequencies. Figure 41 shows the frequencies for the Binghamton TRSA. Any bearings shown are from the airport. If you're approaching anywhere within the bearings of 051 degrees to 184 degrees from the airport, you can contact approach control on 127.55 MHz. The AFD, figure 42, also contains this information. If you're departing Binghamton, you can also elect to use the TRSA service. Usually, the ATIS or the ground controller will provide you with the appropriate departure control frequency to use after departure. In short, the TRSA is a good thing. It helps pilots approach and depart busier airports in a safer manner. Having ATC call traffic for you enhances safety. Pilot participation in the TRSA service is recommended, but not mandatory. If you happen to be talking to approach control when approaching, or ground control, and don't want TRSA service, you should state negative TRSA service. There may be times when you want to fly your own and perhaps more expeditious route to the airport, and have ATC provide only traffic information for you. At times like these, when it's real busy, TRSA service can entail extensive delay vectoring. In this instance, you might say, Binghamton approach, this is 2132 Bravo, negative TRSA service. Request traffic advisories en route to Binghamton Airport, over. When approaching and before entering Binghamton's Class D airspace, you'd cancel traffic advisories with approach control, then establish communications with Binghamton Tower and request landing instructions. Conversely, when departing an airport, you can state negative TRSA service to the ground controller. This tells the controller that you want to fly your own route out of the airport. You might be wondering why we have TRSAs when we have Class B and C airspace that seem to serve a similar function. TRSAs belong to airports that don't qualify for Class B or C airspace, yet have enough traffic to justify the presence of some sort of radar service. A friend of mine was departing Ontario Airport in the Los Angeles area when Ontario had a TRSA. He was heading 270 degrees west toward the Pacific Ocean and wanted to go to San Diego, south to his left about 90 degrees. He kept asking for a heading toward San Diego, but the controller wouldn't comply because of a traffic conflict. Finally, in frustration, my friend said, "Ontario approach, this is 2132 Bravo. I've been flying 270 for 10 minutes. Can't I please have a more southerly heading?" The controller replied, "All right, 32 Bravo, turn left to a heading of 269. See what I mean? It gets busy sometimes. Special use airspace. As if A, B, C, D, E, and G weren't special enough, there are a few more special surprises out there in the air. Special use airspace is pretty much what it says it is. Airspace that is set aside for a particular purpose. Some of it you can use, though with caution, while some of it is strictly off limits without specific permission. Prohibited areas. Prohibited areas are just that, areas where flight is simply prohibited. Figure 43 shows prohibited area P47. This area is defined by blue hatched lines within the prohibited area. Under the Special Use Airspace section shown on the sides of the Aeronautical Sectional Chart, Figure 44, there is a listing of different Special Use Airspace segments as well as their limitations. P47 extends to 4,800 feet MSL and is in continuous operation. Like many things, prohibited is a somewhat relative term. Some prohibited areas function only during limited hours. Make the worst-case assumption that prohibited really means prohibited, and you can't go wrong. This is one of those situations where making a mistake will probably get you a bushel basket full of trouble. Prohibited areas protect sensitive sites ranging from the White House to nuclear power plants and secret military installations. Unless you have a lot of free time on your hands, don't even think about trying to get permission to cross a chunk of prohibited airspace. Go around it. Restricted areas. Restricted areas are much more numerous than prohibited areas. Unlike prohibited areas, they restrict flights due to the unusual activities conducted within them. These areas often contain invisible hazards to aircraft, such as the firing of artillery, aerial gunnery, guided missiles, or, in the case of restricted area in Figure 45, big rockets. Restricted areas are identified by blue hatched lines similar to those defining prohibited areas. You can tell the difference by the listing of either a P or an R next to its identifying number. Rockets are often fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base located in R2516. There's nothing more unsettling than looking out your window and seeing yourself in formation with a Saturn V rocket booster. The Special Use Airspace section in the Aeronautical Sectional Chart, Figure 46, shows R2516 is in use continuously and extends to an unlimited height. Unlimited is really, really high, so you can forget about climbing above it. Before you can enter or fly through a restricted area, you need permission from the controlling agency. This is often obtainable through the local flight service station or Air Route Traffic Control Center, ARTCC. Some restricted areas have designated hours or days of operation, as opposed to being active continuously. It's unlikely that you're going to get permission to enter a restricted area when it is in use. Many times restricted areas aren't in use. The controlling agency for R2516 is ZLACNTR, Los Angeles ARTCC. Contact them for this permission. If you don't know how to establish contact with the center, call the nearest flight service station for help in doing this.
Be cautious when flying in, near, or around restricted areas. A friend once unknowingly penetrated an active restricted area and saw red tracer shells whisking past his window. He had entered a gunnery range at low altitude. Since they don't make bulletproof flight jackets and seats, he felt pretty uncomfortable. Until bulletproof airplanes become popular, avoid flying in active restricted areas unless you have permission from the controlling agency. In the early 1970s, one of Rod's students accidentally entered an active restricted area. He thought the top of the restricted area was 1,500 feet instead of 15,000 feet. A crease in his chart had rubbed off the last zero in 15,000. Upon entering the area, he scattered a covey of F-4s like frightened quail. The flight leader joined up on him and tried to give him hand signals to switch to 121.5. Rod's student simply thought the guy was waving at him, so he waved back. Finally, out of frustration, Rod's student pulled his power to slow down and assess the situation. Unable to maintain slow speed, the jet sped off into the distance. The moral to the story is to get a new chart if wrinkles make it unreadable.
Warning areas. Warning areas are another type of special use airspace where hazards may exist for pilots. Think of warning areas as restricted areas for airspace over which the U.S. does not have the right to impose a restriction because it's beyond the country's boundaries. These areas are identified by a blue hatched line, similar to restricted and prohibit areas as shown in Figure 47. Warning areas contain hazards similar to those found in restricted areas, things that go bang in the night and day, hyperactive fighter aircraft at low altitudes, and unescorted test rockets. Penetration of a warning area, when it's in use, can be very interesting. The Aeronautical Information Manual states that warning areas may contain hazards to non-participating aircraft. Participation, by the way, is on a strictly invitational basis, and you are not invited. It's best to avoid warning areas if at all possible. The Special Use Airspace section on the sectional chart, Figure 48, shows that W291 extends to 80,000 feet and is intermittently in operation. Calling the controlling agency listed, ZLA, in other words, Los Angeles Center, is a good idea if you're planning on entering this area. Alert areas. Alert areas are shown on sectional charts to help identify areas where there is a high volume of pilot training or an unusual type of aerial activity. These areas are shown in the same manner as restricted, prohibited, and warning areas, with a blue hatched line surrounding the specific airspace. Figure 49 shows a typical alert area. Figure 50 shows the special use airspace box on the sectional chart that provides information on this airspace. You are not prohibited from entering an alert area, but, as the name suggests, you should maintain added vigilance. Remember, all pilots have a responsibility for collision avoidance. Think of an alert area as being a place where lots of student drivers are practicing, but instead of cars, they have aeroplanes that go a few hundred miles per hour. Got the picture? Military operations areas, known as MOAs. Military operations areas are designed to separate or segregate certain non-hazardous military activities from IFR traffic outside of Class A airspace. Figure 51 depicts the military operations area outlined with a magenta hatched line. MOAs are often given names instead of numbers. The military has always liked secret code names. Figure 52 shows the MOA airspace listing found on the aeronautical sectional chart. It lists altitude for all the MOAs. These are the MOA's base altitude. All MOAs are assumed to extend vertically to flight level 18,000 feet, unless otherwise stated. The Bakersfield MOA, according to Figure 52, consists of the airspace starting at 2,000 feet AGL and extending up to flight level 180 between the hours listed. The ZLA, Los Angeles Center, is the controlling agency for the Bakersfield MOA. Unlike restricted or prohibited areas, a MOA doesn't restrict or prohibit the flight of VFR aircraft. You can enter a MOA without permission. I suggest, however, that you contact the nearest flight service station and ask about the status of that particular MOA. If it's active, I also suggest you contact the controlling agency prior to entry and ask for traffic advisories. Be aware that you will find all types of military training activities within this airspace. It's possible that military pilots will be doing aerobatics, dogfighting. I don't know why they're so angry at dogs. Or high-speed runs, no military speed limit in a MOA. The last thing you want to do is get in the way of a bunch of battle-thirsty pilots who haven't seen combat in a while. Notice the red circle around Kern Valley Airport in the Isabella MOA. The note attached to this circle, known as an aerodrome traffic zone, states that the MOA excludes the airspace below 1,500 feet AGL within the circle. In other words, you can do touch-and-goes in peace below 1,500 feet at Kern Valley. I had one student in a ground school class who suggested that if a military pilot weren't chasing you, they don't do that, you could make for the red circle. At least they can't go in there. I retorted that if he really wanted to get you, he'd be circling outside that circle until you made a break for your home field. Don't worry, the military guys are friendly. They don't chase us small guys. At least on purpose, anyway. My recommendation is to avoid active MOAs when and where possible. Sometimes you have no choice but to fly through them. If so, do keep your eyes open. One student of mine claimed he discovered why they're called MOAs. Apparently, if you get frightened by a military jet while in one of these areas, you won't want to go back. No more. Military Training Routes, MTRs. Military training routes are highways for military jet aircraft. They usually come in two brands, IFR or VFR military training routes. IFR military training routes are designed to be flown above 1,500 feet AGL. VFR military training routes exist at and below 1,500 feet AGL. Figure 53 shows how MTRs are depicted on an aeronautical sectional chart. MTRs have the letters IR or VR, identifying whether they are IFR or VFR routes. If either route has a 4-digit number next to it, it was designed to be flown at and below 1,000 feet AGL, for example, VR 1266. If the route has only 3 numbers next to it, it was designed to be flown above 1,500 feet AGL, for example, IR 216. Arrows point in the direction these routes are usually flown. While you're not prohibited from flying along or near an MTR, it's a great idea to avoid them whenever possible. Consider that there are no speed restrictions for military aircraft along an MTR. Military jet aircraft may be flying at many hundreds of miles per hour just a few hundred feet off the ground, scaring all kinds of terrestrial dwelling animals, groundhogs, ducks, mice, humans, etc. Don't be one of them. A simple call to the nearest flight service station will give you information on the status of MTRs in your area. In other words, the flight service station should know whether the MTR is in use. Temporary flight restrictions. When an unusual situation arises, natural disaster, events of high public interest, forest fires, etc., the FAA will often issue a temporary flight restriction for that area. Such a restriction helps protect persons or property on the surface, as well as those providing disaster relief, from the hazard of low-flying, sightseeing-type aircraft. These temporary flight restrictions are usually issued in the form of a Notice to Airmen, NOTAM, N-O-T-A-M. NOTAMs usually designate an area and altitude in which the restrictions apply. This is one of the reasons it's always best to check with the local flight service station for that area if you think a temporary flight restriction might be in effect. The following is a typical temporary flight restriction. Flight restriction Julian, California, due to firefighting activity. Effective 1100 UTC, August 28, 1995, until further notice, pursuant to FAR 91.137, subparagraph A, subparagraph 3. Temporary flight restrictions are in effect within a 3-mile radius of the 20 DME fix on the 223-degree radial from Julian VOR at and below 4,000 feet MSL. San Diego Flight Service Station is the FAA coordinating facility. Spaced out. I bet you never thought that there was so much to airspace, did you? There is a lot of airspace and a lot to know about. Mastering the airspace alphabet is crucial to your flying safety and success. The airspace section is the most challenging portion of the private pilot knowledge exam. Student pilots showing up for the flight test. This is the final step to obtaining the coveted private pilot license, are often very weak in this realm as well. If you want to impress the FAA designated examiner giving you your flight check, master the airspace material. There's a good chance he'll get a concussion from hitting himself on the head in amazement at all your correct answers. Now that we've charted the airspace, it's time to chart the charts. That means learning how to identify the symbology on aeronautical charts and use this information to help you navigate. Not knowing how to read an aeronautical chart is like having your limo driver show up wearing a neck brace. A very unsettling experience. So, fasten your seatbelts as we set off to discover how to make sense of all those squiggles, squirts, and markings on popular aviation charts. Chapter 10. Aviation Maps, the Art of the Chart. Maps aren't something new. They began many years ago when one of our Neanderthal brothers or sisters first etched the location of a cave on a deerskin. This really upset the deer, of course, causing him to run away. That produced the world's first moving map display. Many advances have come along since that time. We now draw maps on ground-up trees, which are easier to sneak up on than deer, come in several exciting shades, and leave a good impression. Maps are simply representations of the Earth's surface and its topographic features, the bumps and holes which are mountains and lakes, hills and valleys, deserts and forests. In the case of aviation maps, they also contain information about a variety of man-made features, such as cities, towns, roads, railroad tracks, and the other evidence of human existence. The challenge of map-making is to translate a three-dimensional reality into a two-dimensional map. Despite the age-old injunction about not fitting a round peg in a square hole, that's exactly what every map maker has to do. Like it or not, the Earth is round and bumpy, maps are flat. Therein lies the rub. A good map does several things at once. First, it minimizes the distortion which is inevitable in converting a 3D world to a 2D map. Second, it conveys at a glance crucial information. What's crucial? As a pilot, you need to know where the land rises and falls, lest it rise up and smite thee, and what the major landmarks are, so you can figure out where you are. Pilots use a wide variety of maps, or charts as they are often called, to tell them where to go or where they've been. Each type has specific information, and being able to select the right chart for the right job is an important pilot skill. The Aeronautical Sectional Chart. The sectional chart is a pilot's most common tool for VFR navigation. Figure 3 shows a typical sectional chart. It is one of 37 such charts covering the entire continental United States. Each one is issued with an effective date and an expiration date. Reference Figure 4. Sectional charts are good for approximately 6 months, then reissued. It's very good practice to avoid using an outdated chart. While terrain doesn't move all that much, not even in California, airports, obstructions, navigational aids, and airspace can change. The last thing you want to do is attempt to navigate using a VOR that's been shut down or moved.
Many years ago, a friend was using an old sectional chart, outdated by more than a year, for navigation to a Louisiana airport. The chart indicated the VOR was located on the airport. Arriving over the VOR, all my buddy saw was swampland. He finally called the tower and asked them about what happened to their airport. They said the VOR had been moved 15 miles north of the field 7 months earlier. He's lucky the FAA wasn't moving it the day he flew this cross-country. Imagine the confusion he'd feel at seeing a VOR cruising down the street on a flatbed truck.
Cautious pilots know chart information can change within the 6-month publication cycle. Fortunately, the Airport Facility Directory provides you with the information on these changes as shown in Figure 5. The only way you can be completely assured a sectional chart or any other aeronautical chart is up to date is by checking the AFD for these changes. The sectional chart has a scale of 1 to 500,000. This means every inch on an aeronautical sectional chart represents 500,000 inches on the actual Earth. Fortunately, we can leave our rulers at home because sectional charts and others carry their own mileage scale as shown in Figure 6. This scale is consistent for all sectional charts and equates to 1 inch equals 6.86 nautical miles. You can also measure using the two-knuckle method, as described in Chapter 11, though this is generally a bit less accurate. World Aeronautical Charts, WAC. I always thought they were called WAC, pronounced whack, charts because that's the sound they make when military instructors used them to hit their students over the head. Hey, I was wrong. 14 WAC charts cover the continental United States, Cuba, and Puerto Rico, as shown in Figure 7. These charts have a yearly publication cycle, half as frequent as the sectional chart. WAC charts have a scale of 1 to 1 million, the precise ratio by which pilots exaggerate their adventures and war stories. These charts cover twice as much area per inch as does the sectional chart. They're useful for flight planning purposes when it's necessary to get a big-picture idea of terrain, nav aids, and special use airspace. Because of the larger scale, this chart is particularly useful for pilots flying medium-speed aircraft at higher altitudes. When using this chart, you should be cautious since the increased scale limits charting detail. For instance, WACs don't show location of Class E or D airspace, and only limited amounts of Class B and C airspace are shown. They do, however, show restricted areas and other special use airspace, airways, terrain relief, and other visual aids to navigation. VFR Terminal Area Charts. I never liked the word terminal. It's a tad scary if you think about it. I once told a student I'd be taking him into a terminal area on our next flight. He didn't show up. Rest easy. Terminal areas are simply places with busy, such as Class B, airspace, usually with a major commercial airport right about in the middle. Many of these areas have a VFR terminal area chart associated with them, reference Figure 8A. The area covered by the VFR terminal area chart is indicated by a white bordering rectangular line on a sectional chart as shown in Figure 8B. VFR terminal area charts are exceptionally detailed with a scale of 1 to 250,000. In other words, 1 inch equaling 3.43 nautical miles, which provides much more detail than sectional charts. Revised once every 6 months, these charts are very useful for pilots operating from airports within or near a major terminal. For instance, they allow you to more precisely identify terrain features that help you physically avoid the shelf of Class B airspace. Figures 9A, 9B, and 9C show a comparison of all three charts and their increasing detail of information. Topographical information on a sectional chart.
Topographical ground features on a sectional chart are of great value to the VFR pilot if she or he knows what to look for. Pilotage is most often accomplished by use of the sectional chart, but learning to translate the shading and marking on the chart into a mental picture and match it up with what's outside is definitely a learned skill. It's also a skill you definitely should learn. Not all features are created equal, especially on a chart. The big stuff is pretty easy. Most of my students don't have a problem figuring out the Pacific Ocean. It's big, it's blue, and they've usually seen it before. Deciphering the contour features of a mountain or the alluvial fan of small streams takes a little more skill.
Here are some of the major topographical features you should be familiar with. Keep in mind, not all features on the ground are shown on the chart. What mapmakers show on the chart, however, is often found on the surface. I say often because over time, some landmarks disappear by erosion, construction, etc. Relief, the sloping of terrain. Depicting three-dimensional hilly and mountainous terrain on a two-dimensional chart presents some difficulty. Map makers partially solved the problem with the use of contours to depict terrain elevations. Contours are lines joining areas of equal elevation, somewhat like an isobar on a weather map connecting areas of equal pressure. Figure 10 is an example of how contours depict terrain elevation. On a sectional chart, contour lines are spaced at 500-foot intervals as shown in Figures 11A and 11B. Occasionally, contours may be shown at 250 feet, 100 feet, or even 50 feet foot levels in areas of relatively low relief or slope. You can tell a lot about the slope of the terrain by examining the spacing between the contour lines in Figure 11A. Closely spaced contour levels indicate rapidly rising terrain, while contours spaced farther apart indicate less precipitous terrain. Color. An additional aid in determining the height and slope of terrain is color. Every sectional chart has a terrain color bar on its front side, see Figure 12. The color bar shows a specific color representing the maximum and minimum elevations of terrain. These colors range from light green for the lowest elevation to dark brown for higher elevations. For instance, the dark yellowish color shown in position A in Figure 12 represents terrain rising between 5,000 and 7,000 feet above sea level. Remember, a specific color doesn't precisely indicate the height of terrain. It indicates a range of altitudes, in other words, 5,000 to 7,000 feet, through which terrain can be found in those areas. More precise indications of terrain are identified by something known as spot elevations. Spot elevation symbols. Figure 13a shows a spot elevation used on VFR charts. Figure 13b shows the actual terrain features from the air. Normally, spot elevations, shown as small black dots, are chosen by mapmakers to indicate the high point of a particular mountain range or ridge. Next to the small black dot is the elevation of that spot above sea level. Remember, there can be several spot elevations in a local area. These spot elevations show heights of local peaks and don't necessarily represent the highest terrain in that area. The highest terrain, located within an area bordered by lines of latitude and longitude, known as a quadrangle, is identified by a slightly larger black dot. Spot elevations showing highest terrain. Quadrangles are the rectangular areas bounded by printed lines of longitude and latitude as shown in Figure 14. Within each quadrangle is a single large black dot. This dot is a special dot elevation feature that locates the highest terrain within that area and shows its height above sea level. See Figure 15. While there may be several spot elevation figures, small black dots, within a quadrangle, there will only be one represented by a larger black dot. Maximum elevation figures, MEF. Maximum elevation figures represent the highest elevation of terrain or other obstacles, towers, trees, etc., within a quadrangle. Figure 16 shows the MEF value, point A, from the quadrangle containing the spot elevation identified by point B. The two-digit number represents the MEF value in hundreds of feet with the last two zeros missing. Figure 16, point A, shows an MEF value of 6,700 feet MSL.
MEF values are slightly higher than the obstruction within the quadrangle it represents. How much higher? Cartographers, people who make maps, have a specific formula for figuring MEF values. To understand how this is computed, you must first understand that only man-made obstacles standing more than 200 feet AGL are generally charted. Those 200 feet or less are charted if they are considered critical by cartographers, in other words, in the vicinity of an airport. Cartographers then add a minimum of 100 feet onto the highest elevation shown on the chart. Then they round up to the nearest whole number 100 value. Finally, they add an additional 200 feet for those man-made obstructions which may not be shown.
For instance, the MEF value in Figure 16 is 6,700 feet MSL, point A. The critical elevation figure for that quadrangle is 6,378 feet MSL, point B. Adding 100 feet onto 6,378 equals 6,478. Rounding this up to the nearest whole number 100 value equals 6,500. Adding an additional 200 for uncharted obstruction equals 6,700 feet MSL. The MEF is calculated in a similar manner if a man-made obstacle standing more than 200 feet AGL is located on the highest peak in a quadrangle. In this instance, only 100 feet is added to the top of the obstacle. Then this value is rounded up to the nearest whole number 100 value to calculate the MEF. The point here is the MEF is not the minimum altitude you should fly within this quadrangle. You should be at least a minimum of 1,000 to 2,000 feet higher or more than any MEF value shown along your route. This becomes especially important at night when it's difficult to see terrain or obstacles, even if these obstacles are lit and you don't want to hit one and light it up even more. Obstacles. At first glance, the item in Figure 17A looks like the teepee, or bingo temple, of an Indian reservation. It's not. This symbol represents obstacles standing less than 1,000 feet AGL. The bold number represents the height of the top of the obstacle above sea level. The number contained within the parentheses is the height the obstacle stands above ground level. If you're ever asked to find the height of the base of the obstacle above sea level, you only need to subtract the obstacle's AGL height from its height above sea level. Be careful when taking a knowledge exam. Test makers have often graduated from trick question graduate school and will try and confuse you with AGL and MSL values. Figure 17B shows the same obstacle as seen from the ground. Obstacles standing 1,000 feet or higher above ground level are portrayed by a more elongated obstruction symbol as shown in Figure 18. These bold numbers and those within the parentheses represent heights MSL and AGL, respectively. Sometimes these obstacles will have light ray symbols emanating from the top of the obstruction symbol as shown in Figure 19. This indicates the obstacle has a high-intensity strobe lighting system associated with it. Sometimes an obstacle has the letters UC next to it as shown in Figure 20. This means the obstacle is under construction. If the eventual height above ground that the obstacle will stand is known, it will be shown in parentheses, even though the building of the obstruction isn't completed. Roads. Roads and highways make excellent VFR reference points as shown in Figure 21A and 21B, and many pilots claim that IFR really stands for I follow roads. Highways, especially major ones, are relatively easy to identify from the air. VFR charts often distinguish between single and multi-lane roads. Some major interstates even have their route numbers listed on the sectional chart. Railroad tracks. Railroad tracks, Figure 22A, are often relatively easy to identify from the air, see Figure 22B, especially if you're at a fairly low altitude. This is particularly true when a train lopes along the tracks. It's rare to see trains moving without tracks. If you see one, take a picture and send it to me. It's worth millions. Wires. Power transmission wires and telephone lines are depicted on charts as shown in Figure 23A. These wires are usually a lot easier to see on the chart than they ever are from the air, Figure 23B. They're not very wide, and they tend to blend in with the terrain below, though you might have some success spotting the supporting towers. I'd be cautious about relying on them as my sole source of VFR landmarks or checkpoints for any cross-country flight. Shorelines, rivers, and streams. Shorelines for coastal areas, along with piers, wharves, and jetties, are excellent landmarks as shown in Figure 24A and 24B. Other large bodies of water make excellent landmarks as shown in Figure 25A and 25B. Of course, this assumes a drought hasn't made the shoreline unrecognizable. You'll probably have more difficulty in recognizing streams and small rivers from the air as shown in Figures 26A and 26B. Frankly, unless you're using major rivers, the Colorado River for example, you'll be better off using larger bodies of water, roads, or other references for VFR checkpoints. Populated areas. On sectional and VFR terminal charts, populated areas in the form of cities and large towns are outlined in yellow as shown in Figure 27A. As long as you don't become too hung up on comparing the actual city to the yellow borders on the sectional, you'll find them a useful VFR reference point. Cities often grow faster than cartographers update their charting information. This can cause the city to have a very different outline from that shown on the chart, Figure 27B. Smaller towns and villages are shown by a white circle, Figures 28A and 28B. These areas also make useful VFR landmarks. You'll find cities and towns even more useful at night, where their lights provide extremely useful landmarks for VFR navigation. Airports. Frankly, there are few VFR reporting points better than airports. I like them for VFR navigation because I like having a place to land in the event of engine, weather, or human bladder problems. Airports are divided into colors on the map. They are not really painted these colors, just like the states aren't painted the colors you saw on your junior high school maps. Magenta-colored airports, Figure 29, don't have an air traffic control tower, ATCT. Those shown in blue have a tower, although it may not be in operation 24 hours a day. Most aren't. Figure 30 shows an airport associated with an ATC tower. All recognizable runways, including closed runways, are pictured within the airport symbol for visual identification. Normally, both the magenta and blue airport symbols are circles unless the airport has a hard-surfaced runway greater than 8,000 feet. In this instance, the airport symbol takes on a more realistic look, as shown in Figure 31. Any airport having a darkened circle with the runways in reverse bold white has a hard surface runway between 1,500 and 8,000 feet in length, as shown in Figure 32A and 32B. Airports with soft surface runways, grass, dirt, etc., or with hard surfaces less than 1,500 feet long, are shown by an open symbol without the runway or runways depicted, Figure 33A and 33B. Military airports are shown by a double circle, Figure 34. An open dot within a hard-surfaced runway configuration indicates the approximate position of a VOR located on the field, as shown in Figure 35. Airport symbols on VFR charts, having 4 square protrusions around the airport, indicate that fuel services are available during normal working hours, in other words, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. local time. See Figure 35. Some airports are restricted in that they are private and not open to public use. These airports are identified by the airport symbol containing the letter R, as shown in Figure 36. Next to an airport symbol, you'll find the airport data, Figure 37. The official airport name is located above the control tower frequency, identified by the letters CT. Some airports have more than 2 control tower frequencies, and this isn't for pilots who really like to talk either. Different frequencies are for use by aircraft approaching from different directions, or using different parallel runways at very large airports. The automatic Terminal Information Service frequency, which is listed, will provide the proper frequency. The last line of information starts with the airport's elevation in dark, bold numbers. An L following this number means lighting is available from sunset to sunrise. The next number is the length of the longest runway in hundreds of feet. The usable runway may be less. And the Unicom frequency. Unicom stations at tower-controlled airports usually provide fuel service, while those at non-tower airports usually provide traffic information and may provide fuel service as well. Figure 38 shows the typical airport data for a non-tower airport. Notice that the letter L has an asterisk next to it. This means airport lighting limitations exist. Runway lights for night landings may be available part-time or on request. Refer to the AFD to find out more about the airport's lighting. Airways. VFR airways, also known as Victor airways, are shown on sectional charts as depicted in Figure 39. Each airway typically extends from one VOR to the next and is identified by its own unique number. These are the numbers used on a flight plan to describe your route of flight. A square box with a number inside shows the airway distance between the VOR stations in nautical miles. Visual checkpoints. Visual checkpoints are shown on sectional and terminal charts by a magenta flag. Figure 40. These are prominent landmarks visible from the air. Air traffic controllers may ask you to report your position in reference to these landmarks when contacting them for landing.
One time, a student was approaching a major psychiatric hospital, which was a designated visual checkpoint. The student wasn't aware of this reporting point. He called the tower for landing instructions and said,
San Jose Tower, this is 2132 Bravo, inbound from the north for landing, over.
The tower replied,
"Hey, 32 Bravo, are you headed for the mental hospital?"
The student said,
No. Why, is my flying that bad?
You must pay attention to these symbols.
Airborne vehicle symbols. In addition to aeroplane activity, other airborne vehicles use the airspace. Figure 41 shows those areas containing ultralight activities, hang gliders, gliders, and parachutists. We'll consider parachutists airborne vehicles in this instance. The symbols simply remind you to be extra vigilant. Park, wildlife, forest, wilderness, and primitive areas. Figure 42 identifies the boundaries of either a National Park Service area, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service area, or U.S. Forest Service Wilderness or Primitive area. Aircraft operating within one of these areas are often requested to maintain a minimum altitude of 2,000 feet above the surface within these areas, unless the chart specifically notes a different altitude. Maintaining these minimum altitudes prevents destruction or damage to our national wildlife. It also helps prevent people from thinking pilots are unconcerned about anyone but themselves. General aviation depends to a substantial degree on public tolerance for its existence, and disrupting the solitude of backpackers or annoying wildlife to death is not a defensible act.
Sometimes, of course, the wildlife defends itself. Many years ago, a fellow in Alaska decided wildlife wasn't all that sacred. He was piloting a helicopter when he spotted a grizzly bear. Descending only a few feet above the grizzly, he couldn't believe he was this close. He taunted the beast with the helicopter's landing gear skid. Then, crikey! In a surprise move, it was a surprise to the pilot, the bear rose up, grabbed the skid, and retrieved his lunch from room service, if you know what I mean. Pay close attention to the minimum altitudes for these areas.
While there are many other symbols to discuss on the sectional chart, we've covered some of the most important ones. Take time to study the VFR charts in greater detail. With a little practice in chart symbol interpretation, you'll be able to fly anywhere using pilotage as your single navigational tool.
We've come this far in our introduction to aviation, and now we've reached the Great Divide. The next subject allows us to put our charts to use. After all, if you don't know how to navigate, you're not likely to go anywhere, at least anywhere you intended to go, and charts will have little significance to you. In the upcoming chapter, we'll discuss the most common means of navigation. You'll find this chapter quite valuable, since you'll need to have some knowledge of the subject before your instructor lets you zip off on solo cross-country flights. Chapter 11. Radio Navigation. The Frequency Flyer Program. Pilots need good navigational skills. They need to find airports. After all, that's where the fuel is, the sandwiches as well. Until aerial refueling of light airplanes is standard, navigational skills will always be a necessity, and even aerial refueling won't solve the sandwich challenge. While getting there is definitely more than half the fun of flying, finding the airport is pretty darn satisfying. It's interesting to watch people learn aviation navigation. Some people who can find a white ostrich in a snowstorm on the ground can't seem to locate the airport when they're in the air, even when they're still in the pattern. Others who've spent their lives asking, "Where am I?" suddenly find that being airborne gives them the perspective they need to discover where they are, where they've been, and where they're going.
As a student pilot, it seemed to Rod like he got lost on every trip. It felt that way. The FBO bought a St. Bernard puppy and promptly named it Rod. If Rod knew then what he knows now, he would never have been lost. He'd just keep changing where it was he wanted to go. He'd be in a constant state of destination flux. Rod envied his hot air balloon brothers and sisters who weren't the least bit concerned about landing at an airport. Their flight instructors would ask, "Where are you going?" "That way," was their reply as they pointed with the wind. Much to the happiness of insurance companies, airplane navigation is more sophisticated.
The world of aviation navigation is changing rapidly. In flying's early days, pilots navigated by looking out the window and spotting familiar landmarks. The first big breakthrough was maps, which enabled pilots to go where they hadn't gone before. Then came simple forms of radio navigation, in which an electronic signal is used as a guidepost. Today, highly sophisticated satellite navigation is well on its way to being the main means by which pilots determine their position. As incredible as it might seem, a private pilot today can buy a device for just a few $100s, which tunes 5 or more satellites simultaneously and displays where the aeroplane is to within a few hundred feet. Toward the end of the chapter, we'll be taking a look at the gee-whizzardry of satellite navigation. But before that, I want to introduce you to some of the more basic forms of navigation. These are still the most frequent ways by which pilots get around, and they're likely to be with us for many more years. Pilotage. The most elementary form of navigation is pilotage, in which you look out the window and combine your observations with information from an aviation map to locate your position. Having seen and heard about all the fancy navigation gadgets, you're probably wondering why anybody would want to navigate by just looking at where they're flying. I can think of several good reasons. One is that it might save your rawhide one day. Electronic toys are great when they're working, but like any good guppy, they can and do go belly up. A total electrical failure means that all the nice electronic toys go to sleep. you're left with a compass and pilotage. Aviation is a very peculiar mix of something old, something new. Some of the technology and techniques represent the cutting edge. Others are throwbacks to a different era. We still put magnetic compasses in aeroplanes to teach pilotage to pilots because these things are virtually bulletproof. When all else literally fails, pilotage can and will get you through. A second very important reason for developing your skills at pilotage is that you should always be checking and double-checking what any bunch of circuit boards is telling you. Some years ago, a commercial airliner strayed into forbidden airspace and was shot down because the pilots had misprogrammed their zillion-dollar inertial navigation system. Redundancy is second only to predictability on the list of important things that make aeroplanes fly. Wherever and whenever possible, you will find that good pilots check one thing against another and resolve any discrepancies.
Hey, Normie, it's a little-known fact that pilotage is the ultimate navigational check. No electronic system of navigation is foolproof. Its electronic circuits can freeze, fritz, or fry. Its CPU can be out to lunch. Some types of electronic signals can be affected by atmospheric variations, local electronic interference, or perhaps even secret Martian ray guns.
When all else fails, and it does, pilotage suddenly looks very good. It's also a very satisfying skill to develop. If you don't have map reading experience, the first few hours will take some concentrated effort on the ground in order to translate the map into visual representation of what's on the ground. Once you learn to do that, the map will prove to be your friend. Don't leave home without it. One of the things that sends chills up and down the spines of flight instructors is students raised on electronic goodies who think they can fly without maps. You should never leave the ground without having in hand at least the sectional chart, an aviation map covering an area that is generally several hundred miles across, for the entire area you will traverse. We've already discussed these charts in Chapter 10. I hope you realize how valuable they are as navigational tools. Make sure you carry one on every flight and learn how to read them in order to become proficient at pilotage. A final benefit to pilotage is that it encourages pilots to look out the window. The flowering of the electronic era in navigation has brought with it head-in-cockpit disease. This affliction can strike any pilot of any experience level. The symptoms are an obsessive preoccupation with the glowing readouts in the cockpit, and the failure, sometimes terminal failure, to look outside and pay attention to what's going on. I've noticed this disease becoming more frequent as the MTV generation has progressed into pilothood. Some recently minted pilots think that if they tune their satellite navigation receiver just right, it will play a Madonna rock video. My advice to all pilots is to look out the window. Not just for the purpose of avoiding other aeroplanes, though that's an important reason, but also to gain the full enjoyment and wonder of aviating. We're privileged to be able to fly, and the greatest wonders are to be seen out the window. Enjoy them by practicing pilotage. Electronic elucidation. There's more to modern navigation than meets the eye, so let's move on to some of the radionavigational devices that grace the cockpit of most GA aircraft. The mainstay of the aviation navigation system since the late 1940s has been the ground-based, very high-frequency, omnidirectional range, VOR system. While it's still the major mode of navigation, the VOR system is now a senior citizen. Many of the VOR stations still use vacuum tube technology. They're expensive and difficult to maintain, and for that reason alone will probably be phased out in the not-too-distant future. For the moment, however, VOR is very much with us. Dotted around the country, the VOR stations on the ground emit a signal which is received and displayed in the cockpit. Properly used, this VOR information enables pilots to navigate to or from any of the hundreds of VOR stations. It's the designated paths between these VOR stations which constitute the electronic highways in the sky we discussed earlier. At the time VOR was developed and deployed, the FAA suggested no one would ever get lost again. They underestimated us. As simple a device as it is to use, VOR is still capable of tying some pilots into complete navigational knots. The big picture. VOR navigation requires two things: airborne VOR equipment, see Figure 1, and a ground transmitting station, Figure 2. The ground transmitter radiates 360 electronic spokes called radials from its center. Each radial, think of it as radiating away from the station, represents 1 degree on the compass, with 0 degrees being due north from the station. The 90-degree radial reaches eastward, etc. Using their airborne VOR equipment, pilots can navigate either directly to or from a VOR station on any of its 360 radials. Pilots can also obtain position fixes using 2 or more VOR stations. Of course, knowing where you are in relation to a VOR station does no good unless you know where the VOR station is. That's why pilots will always fly with aeronautical sectional charts, which depict these stations and their locations. To make understanding the VOR easier, imagine the ground station transmits specific directional signals for every degree of the compass. Figure 3 shows some of these signals. Since there are 360 degrees in the compass rose, there are 360 specific signals radiating from the station. The VOR actually transmits 2 signals that define radials. But hey, we're not trying to get a PhD in astroelectronics, are we? VOR stations shown on the sectional chart. Figure 4 shows how VORs are depicted on a sectional chart. The VOR station is located in the middle of the surrounding compass rose, position 1. On aeronautical sectional charts, individual radials aren't shown, but they can be approximated by using the outer ring of the compass rose, see Figure 5. The VOR compass rose has a marking every 5 degrees, a larger marking every 10 degrees, and numbers every 30 degrees. A box below the compass rose lists the name, Morse code identification, and frequency of the station, position 2. Each VOR station transmits its signals on frequencies ranging from 108.0 to 117.905 MHz. Megahertz are millions of cycles per second. These frequencies are just below the VHF frequencies used for aircraft communications, which are 118.0 to 135.975 MHz. Why does every VOR station have a Morse code identifier? It allows you to positively confirm the station is the one you think it is. Remember, I told you a few moments ago never to completely trust the dashing electrons. Sometimes what you see isn't what you get. Just because a frequency is tuned in and showing on the display does not absolutely guarantee you are receiving that frequency. Things can go wrong. You want to make sure the VOR you're using for navigation is the one you think you're using. You simply turn up the volume on your VOR receiver long enough to match the dots and dashes you hear with what you see on the chart. There's no requirement to memorize the Morse code, for which you might be saying, thank goodness. Some VOR stations also have a repetitive voice identification along with the Morse code.
Several years ago, Ron took a student who was reluctant to identify navigational stations on a cross-country flight. All the student had to do was select the frequency in the navigation radio, turn up the volume for a moment, and compare the Morse code he heard with what he saw on the chart. This was apparently too much effort for him. The student was too lazy. The only exercise he ever did was get up. That he did every day at the crack of noon. One time, when the student became slightly distracted, he misdialed the frequency and selected the wrong VOR station. Rod did nothing but watch. They were supposed to be headed towards Palm Springs, inland toward visibly higher mountains. Approximately 5 miles off the coast of California, over the Pacific Ocean, Rod said, "Hey, what's that down there?" The student looked down, looked up, and said,
Dude, check it out, like a lake?"
Astounded, Rod replied, "Look, there's an oil supertanker down there. What does that mean?" The student glanced over and said,
Man, like this must really be like a big lake?"
his pilotage wasn't very good either.
Identifying navigation stations via their Morse code identifiers is important for another reason. Stations sometimes malfunction or are taken off the air for maintenance. The absence of a Morse identifier or the broadcast of a test code --... tells you the VOR is not reliable for navigation. VORs operate on VHF frequencies. While VHF transmissions are relatively free from interference, they don't bend or curve around obstacles like low-frequency signals. Recall from our previous discussion on radio transmission that a VHF signal depends on line of sight. If there isn't a clear path from the transmitter to receiver, the signal can't get through. Practically speaking, if mountains, hills, or even buildings are between you and the VOR station, the navigational signal can be lost. You might be able to hear the Morse code, but the onboard VOR equipment's warning device, the off flag, will be activated. Adequate reception is only assured when you hear the audio identification with no off flag visible. We'll discuss this flag shortly. Your VOR equipment. Aeroplanes usually have one or more VOR receivers on board. A typical receiver is shown in Figure 6. Usually, this is a combination of a navigation receiver and a communications transmitter receiver in one package, which is referred to as the NavCom. The VOR receiver is connected to the VOR indicator shown in Figure 7. When pilots refer to the VOR in their aeroplane, they are usually talking about the display, though the display is simply a graphic representation of what the radio receiver is getting. The VOR consists of a vertical needle, also known as a course deviation indicator, or CDI, that swings left or right, a flag, also known as an ambiguity indicator, with 3 possible indications, to, from, or off, and an omni-bearing selector, or OBS knob. From now on, we'll assume the OBS is the knob that you turn. Surrounding the needle is a circular, movable compass rose controlled by the OBS. Rotating the OBS causes a different compass value to move under the inverted white triangle or index at the top of the instrument. VORs and airborne freeways. Let's begin our discussion with a recollection of your last car trip when you drove through a small town. It was so small that Baskin & Robbins' surprise flavor of the week was vanilla. Let's also say the freeway pointed due north as it passed straight through the town as shown in Figure 8, Position A. While entering and leaving town, your car pointed north 360 degrees, in the same direction as the freeway. If the portion of the freeway exiting the town had a different name than the portion entering the town, Would this affect the direction your car pointed while passing through town? Of course not. Let's call the portion of the freeway exiting the town to the south Freeway 180, and the portion exiting to the north Freeway 360, position B. Now we can say that we went to town on Freeway 180 and exited on Freeway 360. Our direction never changed, despite giving the freeway different names. Navigation by VOR is basically the same, as shown by position C. If we're headed northbound to the town VOR, we travel inbound on the 180-degree radial and outbound on the 360-degree radial. Either way, our airborne freeway points in a direction of 360 degrees, just like the ground freeway. Referring to a single freeway by radials going to and from a VOR station is sometimes awkward, so let's refer to our freeways as courses. The course is simply the direction our airborne freeway points. Okay, now you're ready to see how we can select and fly any one of 360 individual courses, airborne freeways, by using our VOR equipment. How to navigate with VOR. To navigate by VOR, the first thing you do is tune and identify the VOR station on which you wish to navigate. After putting this frequency in the appropriate nav receiver and checking the Morse code, you're ready to dial for courses, airborne freeways. Rotating the OBS to a specific number allows you to select any one of the VOR's 360 flyable courses. Let's suppose you selected 360 degrees. 0 degrees is the same thing, with the OBS as shown in Figure 8, position D. Your airborne VOR equipment now automatically orients itself to tell you where the 360-degree course is located, as shown in Figure 9a. As you can see, the 360-degree course runs completely through the VOR in a direction of 360 degrees, just like the freeway running through town. If you had selected the 270-degree course, your VOR equipment would orient itself to the 270-degree course as shown in Figure 9b. Selecting 030 degrees with the OBS orients you to the course shown in Figure 9c, and selecting 240 degrees orients you to the course shown in 9d. In Figure 10, we've selected the 360-degree course with the OBS. To fly this course, you should head your aeroplane in a magnetic direction of 360 degrees on the heading indicator. Assuming you've done this and your aeroplane is in position A, the VOR indicator shows a centered needle with a to flag indication. As you fly along the selected course, the to flag automatically changes to a from flag on the other side of the station, aeroplane C. When directly over the station, aeroplane B, the flag reads off, indicating a position of ambiguity. You're neither going to nor from the VOR at the time. Simply stated, the to or from flag lets you know whether you'll be going to or from the VOR station if you point in the direction of the course set into the OBS, while keeping the needle centered. Figure 11 shows several VOR indications in relation to aeroplane positions. Aeroplane A is heading 360 degrees, the direction of the selected course. Its airborne VOR equipment shows a right needle with a to indication. This means that the selected course is to the right, and if aeroplane A was on the course, it would be headed to the station. Aeroplane A must turn to the right to intercept the selected course. So must aeroplanes C and E. Aeroplanes B, D, and F must turn left to intercept. Notice that when you are abeam 90 degrees to the side of the station, the ambiguity indicator shows off. This means that you are in the zone of ambiguity and are neither going to nor from the station. Let's say aeroplane A in figure 12 turns right to a heading of 045 degrees to intercept the 360 degree course to the VOR. As it approaches the course, the VOR needle begins to center as shown in positions B and C. Once the needle is centered, the aeroplane should be heading 360 degrees to fly the selected course to the station. Aeroplanes E, F, G, and H show a similar sequence of intercept with a from indication. Aeroplanes F and G intercept the 360 degree route with a 45 degree angle. An intercept heading of 315 degrees is 45 degrees to the left of 360 degrees. A right or left needle indication doesn't tell you on what side of the aeroplane the selected course is located unless you physically point the aeroplane in the direction set into the OBS, or you imagine yourself pointed in this direction. Why? The VOR needle and flag indications are completely independent of the aeroplane's heading. With the OBS set to 360 degrees, the VOR indication on the aeroplanes in Figure 13, Quadrant A, all show the same thing, a right needle with a to indication. Aeroplanes in Quadrant B all show a left needle with a to indication, regardless of which way the aeroplane's heading. Aeroplanes in Quadrant C all show a right needle with a from indicator, and all aeroplanes in Quadrant D show a left needle with a from indication. The point is that a left or right needle deflection and a to or from flag indication only have meaning if you are pointed, physically or mentally, in the direction of the selected course. VORs don't know which way your aeroplane is heading. That's because the airborne VOR equipment is programmed to think of itself as always pointing in the direction of the course selected by the OBS. It only knows if it's to the right or left of a selected course, and if the selected course takes it to or from the station. If the aeroplane also physically points in the same direction as the selected course, or you at least visualize it pointed that way, then a right or left needle literally means that the selected course is to your right or left. For instance, Aeroplane 1 in Figure 13 shows a right needle and a to flag indication. It's obvious that the selected course isn't physically located off the right wing of Aeroplane 1. If the pilot were to physically turn the aeroplane to 360 degrees as shown by Aeroplane 2, or at least imagine being pointed in that direction, then the needle reflects the side of the aeroplane on which the course is located, the right side. Let's put our knowledge to practical use with a real-to-life problem. Intercepting a VOR course. You depart Baghdad Airport and want to fly the 030 degree course to and beyond the VOR as shown in Figure 14. To be precise, degree values less than 100 are shown with a 0 in front of them. This prevents thinking that a value of 30 is 300 degrees. We pronounce 030 as 030. Your destination is Yazoo Airport, which is directly on the 030 degree course from the VOR. You set your OBS to 030 and depart Baghdad as shown by Aeroplane A. The VOR face in Aeroplane A shows a left needle with a to indication. Obviously, the 030 degree course is not to the left of Aeroplane A, But if we turn the aeroplane to the direction of the selected course, 030 degrees, then the needle and the flag will properly orient us to that course as shown by aeroplane B. Now, and only now, can the needle be said to tell us the selected course is physically to the left of the aeroplane. The to from flag tells us that once we're on the course and heading 030 degrees, we'll be going directly to the VOR station. We'll assume there's no wind to blow us off course. To intercept the 030 degree course, aeroplane B must be turned to the left. How many degrees should you turn? The answer is more than 0 degrees and less than 90 degrees of intercept. It all depends on how fast you want to intercept. For practical purposes, if the VOR needle is fully deflected, you don't necessarily know if the selected course is 1 mile away or 100 miles away. In these situations, if your objective is to get on the course as soon as possible, intercept at a 90-degree angle. Ask yourself, what heading is 90 degrees to the left of 030 degrees? Just look at the compass rose along the outside of the airborne VOR equipment and count 90 degrees to the left of the selected course, 030 degrees, as shown in Figure 15. Flying a heading perpendicular to the selected course, 300 degrees in other words, as shown by aeroplane C in Figure 14, will allow you the shortest intercept time.
A young student named Bob was on his private pilot check ride performing a similar 90-degree intercept to a course. He wanted to show the examiner how skillfully he could turn to the desired course and end up with a centered needle. As he flew through the course the first time, the needle swung from left to right. He made a right 90-degree turn to intercept. The examiner looked at Bob and said,
Bobby, what heading are you using?
In frustration, Bob replied,
all of them, sir?
He finally realized his error and used a smaller intercept angle, 20 to 30 degrees.
Aeroplane C in Figure 14 should plan to turn in the direction of the selected course as the radial is intercepted. A precisely completed interception and turn is shown by aeroplane D. Notice how the VOR needle of aeroplane D centers as the aeroplane heads 030 degrees, the selected course direction. Don't worry if you can't do this precisely at first. How quickly the needle centers is a function of how close you are to the station. A little bit of experience will teach you to estimate the rate at which the needle approaches the center and how much before centering to begin your turn to the on-course heading. Aeroplane D will eventually pass over the VOR and its VOR flag will automatically go from to off and then to from. Obviously, the aeroplane is now on the 030 degree course from the station. Keeping the needle centered will eventually put aeroplane D directly over Yazoo Airport. Many VOR stations have as part of their installation a second piece of navigational gear called the Distance Measuring Equipment, also known as DME. A receiver in the aeroplane converts the DME signals into a readout of exactly how far you are from the VOR station. Suppose the aeroplane has airborne DME equipment, and you know Yazoo's distance from the VOR. If you fly the selected course, until that distance shows on your equipment, you'll be directly over the airport. This provides a very accurate way of finding an airport. More on DME later. Flying from the VOR on a selected course. Let's make VOR usage even more practical. Suppose after departing Faith Airport, as shown in Figure 16, we wanted to fly directly to the Dupree VOR and fly outbound on the 096 degree course to Cheyenne Eagle Airport. How would we do this? First, look at the VOR compass rose in Figure 16 and decide what route runs directly from the center of Faith Airport to the Dupree VOR. Draw a line from the center of Faith Airport through the center of the Dupree VOR and out the side of the compass rose. The line intersects 068 degrees on the compass rose. We'll rotate our OBS to 068 degrees and fly this course to the VOR immediately after departure, as shown by aeroplane A. Once over the VOR, when the flag switches from to off, we'll turn to a heading of 096 degrees, then rotate our OBS to 096 degrees as shown by aeroplane B. We'll track this new route to Cheyenne Eagle. Pretty slick, eh? Well, if you think that's slick, think about this. Suppose you're airborne in the vicinity of Ulost Airport and desire to fly to Wongwei Airport, as shown by aeroplane A in Figure 17. Since you're not exactly sure of your position, what's the best way to get to the Bigfoot VOR? You can always assume you are on some course going to the VOR. How do you know which course it is? Simply tune in the Bigfoot VOR frequency on your navigational radio, identify the station, rotate the OBS until you get a 2 flag indication, and the needle centers, as shown by the VOR indication of aeroplane A in Figure 17. Look up at the index to see what the course is. In our case, we're on the 305-degree course to the Bigfoot VOR. Now, turn to a heading of 305 degree on your heading indicator and fly that course to the VOR as shown by aeroplane B. When you're over the station, follow the same procedure outlined previously to get to Wongwei Airport as shown by aeroplane C. I hope this makes sense because many things don't. For example, while taxiing to the arrival gate on a commercial airline flight, the flight attendant said, "Will those passengers requesting wheelchairs please remain seated?" This never made much sense to me. I hope VORs are making more sense to you by now. Basic orientation in hand, it's now time to really put the VOR to work. The next trick requires 2 VORs, which most airplanes these days have. Figure 18 shows an expanded scaled representation of Yazoo Airport. If the number 1 VOR receiver were set to allow you to navigate from the Bird Talk VOR to Yazoo, could the number 2 VOR receiver be used to inform you when you are over Yazoo? Absolutely. Dual VORs for position fixing. Simply find another station in the vicinity of Yazoo by looking at your aeronautical sectional chart. Figure 18 shows that the Rocket RKT VOR as being nearby. Draw a line from the center of RKT VOR through the center of Yazoo Airport. Ask yourself, what course runs through Yazoo Airport to the VOR? The compass rose around RKT VOR shows this to be approximately the 025-degree course from the station. Set this into the number 2 VOR receiver and tune that receiver to RKT VOR. Figure 18 shows the aeroplane in 3 positions while outbound from BRD VOR to Yazoo Airport. Aeroplane A is outbound from BRD VOR to Yazoo Airport. Its number 2 VOR shows a right needle with a from indication. To make sense of the needle and flag, imagine aeroplane A facing in the direction of 025 degrees. In other words, parallel to the 025-degree course from RKT. You can clearly see that the 025-degree course is to aeroplane A's right side. If aeroplane A was on the 025-degree course, it would be going from the RKT VOR. Therefore, the number 2 VOR for aeroplane A shows a right needle with a from indication. Remember, the VOR's needle and flag indication are independent of the aeroplane's heading. As we approach Yazoo Airport, the needle in VOR number 2 moves towards the center of the instrument as shown by aeroplane B's VOR indication. When the number 2 VOR needle centers, we know we're over Yazoo Airport as shown by aeroplane C. Considering the ample supply of VORs in most parts of our country, it's pretty difficult not to know exactly where you are most of the time. And always remember that we pilots are never really lost. We're just temporarily unsure of our present position. You can use courses going to or from the VOR for position fixing. It is, however, customary to use from courses to cross-check positions. Why? Perhaps it's because most people ask, "Where are you from?" rather than asking, "Where are you to?" Besides, only a New Age guru would understand such a metaphysical question. In other words, it's a matter of convention to state your position from a specific reference, a VOR in this case. Reverse sensing. One of the insidious traps of VOR navigation occurs when pilots attempt to orient themselves or travel to a VOR with a from flag showing on the instrument, or the other way around. If you do attempt to do such a thing, you're going to be as lost as a 13-year-old at a sock hop. Why? Because the VOR needle will show your selected course in reverse of its actual position. When you visit the doctor and say, "Doc, it hurts when I do this," you move your arm, for instance, the doctor says, "Well, don't do that." So I'm telling you, don't try to navigate or orient yourself to a VOR station unless a to flag is showing. Likewise, don't try to navigate or orient yourself from a VOR station unless a from flag shows in the window. These rules sound simple, but you'd be surprised how often pilots forget this. For more about reverse sensing, see Post-Flight Briefing number 11-1. Tracking a selected VOR course. Until now, we've discussed VOR navigation in a wind-free environment. Such an environment seldom exists in the real world. Let's examine how to correct for wind. Wind correction is broken down into 4 components: identifying the effect of wind on the aeroplane, re-intercepting the course, applying a wind correction, and adjusting the correction. Let's see how it works. 1. Identifying the effect of wind. Figure 19 depicts aeroplane A as having just intercepted the 030-degree course to the VOR. Under a no-wind condition, aeroplane A could hold a 030-degree heading and fly to the VOR with a centered needle. But with wind, aeroplane A is going to drift off course. Determining wind direction and making the proper correction is thus paramount to successful navigation. To determine wind effect on the aeroplane, you should fly the value set by the OBS, 030 degrees in this example. Now just wait. If there is no wind, the needle will stay centered, or nearly so. If a crosswind exists, the needle will eventually show a deflection, as depicted by aeroplane B. How much of a needle deflection should you allow before applying a correction? Realistically, you should correct for wind as soon as you notice any needle movement. Unfortunately, some needle movement can be attributed to the difficulty beginners have in holding a heading. As a student pilot, I used the catch-and-release method of heading hold. In other words, I'd finally get on the desired heading, then the next thing I knew, I'd let it go. When it came to courses, I was always letting them go, like fish. I was a real conservationist. I should have joined that famous environmental vegetable group green peas. The best advice in these instances is to let the needle move just a little, to the end of the circle, or donut, in the center of the VOR's face, before making a correction. 2. Re-intercepting the course. If the needle moves to the left, then the selected course is to the left as shown by aeroplane B. The aeroplane has been blown to the right of the course, implying the crosswind is from your left. Once you've identified wind direction, the second step is to get back on course before applying a wind correction. The best way to get back on course is to intercept the course at some angle less than 90 degrees, say around 20 degrees or even 40 degrees if the wind is strong, and fly towards the desired course as shown by aeroplane C. Attempting to re-intercept at too large an angle could cause you to fly through the selected course. In one respect, it's really no big deal if this happens because you would simply re-intercept the course. Snaking along a selected VOR course will get you to your destination, but it's not a professional way to aviate, and it makes your passengers suspicious of your flying skills. 3. Applying a wind correction. Once re-established on course, the third step in tracking is to apply a wind correction. As we previously discussed, the aeroplane must be angled, turned, to some amount into the wind. How much? That depends on the wind speed and wind angle as well as your airspeed. But none of that really matters. Just use 1/2 of your intercept angle, or 10 degrees in this case. Try it and see if it works. It's just like going to the movies. You never quite know how good or bad the film might be, so you try it. The last movie I watched was so bad that I walked out. Unfortunately, it was on TV, and I walked out of my own home. Once you're on course, simply turn the aeroplane 10 degrees to the right for a heading of 020 degrees, as shown by aeroplane D, and wait to see what happens. Aeroplane D has a wind correction angle of 10 degrees while heading 020 degrees. Aeroplanes D and E are tracking directly to the VOR station on the 030 degree course. The needle hasn't moved. Congratulations, you've successfully corrected for wind, and you're darn lucky if you, or for that matter any experienced pilot, can find the proper wind correction angle on the first attempt. Realistically, you're probably going to make a minimum of 2 attempts at determining a wind correction angle before you find the right one. 4. Adjusting the wind correction. Figure 20 depicts a situation similar to Figure 19. The difference is that you're now tracking from a station using the previous 10-degree wind correction angle, as shown by aeroplane A. Soon the aeroplane begins to drift, as shown by aeroplane B. It's now obvious your wind correction angle must be changed. Return to 010 degrees, the original intercept angle, and re-intercept the course as depicted by aeroplane C. Since a heading of 020 degrees, 10-degree wind correction to the left, didn't keep you on course, increase the wind correction angle by 5 degrees. Flying 015 degrees, as shown by aeroplane D, might be a satisfactory correction. If, however, the needle moved to the right, indicating the aeroplane was flying across the 030 degree course to the left, then our wind correction angle was too large. At least now you know the wind correction angle is between 10 and 15 degrees. Sometimes, if the wind varies, the entire flight consists of constantly changing the wind correction angle. This is especially true if you're changing altitudes or flying near mountainous terrain, where wind is often variable. As you become more skilled at tracking, you'll find that you can apply small corrections to stop the needle from moving before it ever gets away from the center. With that kind of skill, the wind can shift every minute, and it won't faze you. Soon you'll become a high priest of VOR tracking, master of meteorological forces, and reign as a king over airway navigation. You'll be required to walk around the flight school in white robes. Pilots from all over will come seeking your guidance. Wow, TV shows, live appearances. Think of the possibilities. If not, at least you'll get to your destination with ease. Chasing the needle.
While on a VOR training flight, Rod's student Bob was having a devil of a time keeping the VOR needle centered. Rod looked over at him and said, "Bob, don't chase the needle." In a moment of frustration, the student looked back and said,
My friends are pilots, and this is the way they do it, dude.
A small smile stretched across Rod's face as he thought of the countless times he had tried to use that type of logic on his father. Rod couldn't resist and said, "Bob, just because your friends jump off a bridge, that doesn't mean you should jump off too." Rod couldn't believe it. The logic worked. The student looked at Rod like a dog looking at a fan and said,
Dude, okay, well, I guess you're right.
Fortunately, the student never heard about bungee jumping. It's also logical to have a little patience with the VOR needle, since patience will probably solve all your tracking problems.
VOR needles become quite sensitive when closing in on VOR ground stations. Rapid needle movements are not uncommon within 5 miles of a VOR transmitter. In this situation, you're likely to hear a thumping sound. Yes, it's the sound of the passengers' heads bumping against the windows as you chase the VOR needle to the right, then to the left, then right again. Don't do it. When you get close to the station, settle on a heading and fly it until station passage. A nifty technique. If you're having trouble keeping the VOR needle centered, try the following technique. As the needle is moving away from the center, turn toward it to stop the needle's movement. Keep increasing the angle slightly, then watch the result. As soon as the needle stops, note your heading. This value approximates the wind correction heading required to stay on course. Now, re-intercept the course at some larger angle. Fly the wind correction heading once you're established on the desired course as shown in Figure 21. Yes, as with all maneuvers in aviation, this does take a little practice. Pilots chase VOR needles out of impatience. They keep turning toward the needle until they see it move back to the center. By then, it's too late. The needle ends up swinging across the face of the instrument faster than a samurai warrior's sword in the heat of combat. Thinking about stopping needle movement first, instead of moving it back to the center, will minimize rapid needle movement. With a little patience, the needle will move slower than a postal worker on Valium. As a flight instructor, I hear some mighty strange ideas about navigation. I was giving a navigational phase check to a student pilot and had such an experience. We were about 10 miles from the VOR and supposedly tracking directly to it. The needle was pegged, and this young fellow seemed to think everything was okay. I asked, "Why is that needle pegged against the side of the instrument?" "Because we're close to the station, and the needle is too sensitive to chase," was his reply. My mouth dropped open, and my eyes bugged out, as if I had just seen those 6 TBM Avengers lost in the Bermuda Triangle. I felt my eyes to make sure they hadn't popped out completely off their sockets, then patiently replied, "You're too far from the station to be satisfied with a deflected needle. If you're a couple of miles horizontal to the station, sensitivity might be an acceptable excuse for not pursuing a rapidly moving needle. However, even under those conditions, you should be using smaller angles of intercept, 5 degrees or so, to recapture that needle." He looked at me and said, "Hey, all the other pilots I fly with do it this way." He should have known better than to say that. Proper names. Why is it that when Elvis is spotted, it's always in some strange pizza parlor or laundromat in Kansas or Mississippi? How come he's never spotted at Mensa headquarters? That's a true mystery to some people, including me. Of course, VOR navigation is not without its own mysteries. For instance, what would you do if asked to track to the VOR on the 180-degree radial? What course would you select with the OBS? The answer is 360 degrees. Let me explain why. Throughout this chapter, I've mentioned that we select VOR courses with the OBS. Those courses are either to or from the VOR. There is another way of expressing the same thing. Earlier, we learned that VORs can be thought of as transmitting 360 individual directional signals spaced 1 degree apart. Since these signals radiate from the station, they're called radials. Figure 22 shows 4 of these radials. Aeroplane A is tracking to the station on the 360-degree course. Another way of describing this is by saying Aeroplane A is tracking to the station on the VOR's 180-degree radial. As Aeroplane A crosses over the station, it would be tracking outbound on the 360-degree radial. Aeroplane B is tracking to the VOR on the 090-degree radial. Aeroplane C is tracking to the VOR on the 360-degree radial, and Aeroplane D is tracking to the VOR on the 270-degree radial. To minimize the confusion, think about it this way. Whenever you are asked to track from a station on a specific radial, simply set your OBS to that radial. After all, radials radiate from the station, and this is the same direction you would fly them. When asked to fly to a VOR on a radial, set the OBS to the reciprocal. Add or subtract 180 degrees from that radial. All the airplanes in Figure 22 are flying to the VOR on specific radials, and each OBS is selected to the reciprocal of the radial it's on. Complex? A mystery? Yes, it's a mystery why we refer to radials when we can refer to courses to and from the station. Well, did anyone ever say that anything in aviation is easy to understand? It's not only aviation that can be confusing. I recently bought satin sheets for our guest bedroom. I got them home, and they had pentagrams stitched all over the fabric. It turns out I was confused and in the wrong department store. I had actually purchased Satan sheets. This is proof that men should only be allowed to shop at Radio Shack. Nevertheless, confusion in shopping, as well as in VOR navigation, is lessened if you pay close attention to our mistakes. Don't be satisfied with being a mediocre navigator. Try your best to keep those needles centered. Make every flight an opportunity to become more proficient. Soon you'll be so skilled at needle tracking that fellow pilots will think the instrument has been turned off. Needle drops to the center when off. One last word here. Don't get the impression that pilots only look at the VOR equipment when they navigate. They look outside, too. See and avoid, remember? The next 2 pages contain sidebars having a few nifty ideas you need to explore. First, there is an easy way to help you answer VOR questions on the FAA Knowledge exam. Use it for the computer exam only. I don't recommend that you use it in the airplane. It's called the VOR Orienter. You can draw it on scratch paper during the test and use to solve your VOR problems. Next is the HSI, or Horizontal Situation Indicator. This is a very popular device found in many airplanes. You should become familiar with it. It makes VOR orientation extremely easy. The Radiomagnetic Indicator, RMI, is another device you may use for navigation. See Post-Flight Briefing number 11-2 for information on the RMI. The VOR Orienter. I've always looked for the easiest way to do things. Minimum energy expended for maximum gain is my motto. Of course, some people are just plain lazy. A bachelor friend of mine is very much like that. If a button falls off his jacket, he'll sew up the hole. If he spills liquid on his kitchen floor, he handles the problem organically. He lets it evaporate. Well, the little device you see here will allow you to discover the answer to VOR problems with minimum energy. It's called a VOR Orienter. Practice drawing it exactly as it's pictured. When you're taking an aeronautical knowledge exam, draw the orienter on a small 2-inch by 2-inch square sheet of paper. Place the orienter over the VOR referenced in the test. Face the arrow on the orienter in the direction set by the OBS. Now, you can easily answer any question about VOR orientation. For example, on a flight from Find Me International Airport to You Be Here Municipal Airport, the 340-degree radial identifies the halfway point of the journey as shown in the accompanying figure. Assume your VOR receiver is tuned to the LCB VOR and the OBS is set to 340 degrees. If you have a right needle with a from indication, have you crossed the halfway point of your flight? To solve the problem, simply place your VOR orienter over the LCB VOR and face it to a heading of 340 degrees, as shown by the dashed lines. The 4 quadrants of the VOR orienter represent the VOR indications for aeroplanes in each of those 4 quadrants. Find the quadrant on the orienter with a right needle and a from indication. This shows you where you are in relation to the selected course. From the looks of it, your aeroplane hasn't crossed the halfway point. The VOR orienter isn't practical for use in flight, but makes perfect sense for aeronautical knowledge exams. The same navigational problem also turns up on exams phrased this way. While on a flight from Find Me International Airport to You Be Here Municipal Airport, what will your VOR indicate if you haven't crossed the halfway point as defined by the 340-degree radial from LCB VOR? Set your orienter up the same way you did previously. Look at the side of the orienter to the left of the halfway point, to the left of the 340-degree radial, in other words. It shows a right needle with a from indication. If you had crossed the halfway point, you'd have a left needle with a from indication. The Horizontal Situation Indicator. HSI and VOR similarities. The Horizontal Situation Indicator, HSI, is a VOR unit combined with a heading indicator, electrically slaved to a compass. Instead of a needle that swings, its course deviation indicator slides sideways, away from the course selection arrow, to indicate the direction and amount of course deviation. The to from indicator is a single white triangle that automatically flips toward the head or tail of the course selection arrow, depending on whether the selected course takes you to or from the station. The heading bug is simply a heading reminder that can be set on any heading value. The small symbolic aeroplane always points straight ahead, in the direction the aeroplane is headed. Course interception is made easy by turning until the symbolic aeroplane is pointed toward the horizontally displaced CDI. Thus, the HSI provides a picture of your aeroplane relative to the selected course. Reference the associated drawing. When aeroplane B intercepts the course, the CDI aligns itself with a course selection arrow. The aeroplane now heads in the direction of the selected course, 068 degrees, and flies to the station. Upon station passage, the to-from triangle will automatically flip and point toward the bottom of the course selection arrow. Aeroplane A departs Faith Airport on a heading of 020 degrees, with its HSI set to intercept the 068 degree course to the VOR. The course selection arrow is set to 068 degrees, and the to from indicator shows that, upon course interception, aeroplane A would be headed to the station. The symbolic aeroplane points in the direction of the display CDI, indicating that the aeroplane is on an intercept course. Aeroplane C flies over the VOR and turns to a heading of 150 degrees to intercept the 110 degree radial from the station. The pilot rotates the course selection arrow to 110 degrees, the desired outbound radial. The to from triangle automatically flips and points toward the bottom of the course arrow, indicating that the course selected is from the station. The symbolic aeroplane is pointed toward the display CDI, indicating that, under a no-wind condition, the aeroplane will intercept the 110 degree radial. When aeroplane D intercepts the 110 degree radial, the CDI centers and the pilot flies a heading of 110 degrees on the slaved compass. With a from indication, triangle pointed toward the bottom of the course selection arrow, aeroplane D is tracking outbound from the station on the 110 degree radial. Distance Measuring Equipment, DME.
Rod stops looking at product advertisements after he has purchased something. To continue looking is like saying, I bet I was pretty dumb for buying this thing, so let me look in the sales literature for some evidence to support this theory. Yes, at periodic moments of weakness, all of us have made regrettable purchases. I have never heard, however, of a pilot regretting the purchase of distance measuring equipment, DME.
DME, shown in Figure 23, provides you with nautical mile distances from many VOR stations. This equipment usually displays ground speed as well. It's a wonderful device, making cross-country flying and position fixing considerably easier. Let's examine how it works. DME is one of those great devices that does so much and demands so little. The DME equipment in the aeroplane operates by sending out paired pulses at specific spacing. These pulses are received at the ground station and then transmits paired pulses back to the aircraft at the same pulse spacing but on a different frequency. The round-trip time for the signal exchange is measured in the airborne DME unit and translated into distance from the aircraft to the ground station. DME provides you with the distance in nautical miles to whatever VOR station you've selected. It's quite easy and remarkably helpful. Not every VOR has a DME station associated with it. How can you tell which ones do? VOR station symbology depicts the presence of DME as shown in Figure 24. Symbol A shows a VOR station without DME. Symbol B is the symbol for a VORTAC. While VORTAC sounds like the name of a Klingon starship captain, it's actually the combination of a civilian VOR and a military navigation station called a TACAN, which stands for Tactical Air Navigation Station. TACAN stations operate on higher frequencies, but what's important to you is that they always include DME capability. Symbol C depicts a combination VOR and DME station. Figure 25 shows the VOR frequency box for the Los Angeles VORTAC. It's perfectly proper to refer to VORTACs as VORs. Sitting to the right of the 113.6 MHz is the DME frequency, shown as Channel 83, that a military pilot would dial on his UHF receiver to obtain navigational information. The only significance the word channel has for you is the implication that the VOR station has DME capability. What DME really tells you? If you stretched a piece of string, obviously a very long piece of string, between the aeroplane and the VOR, then measured it, you would have the distance shown on the DME. This is slant range distance, as shown in Figure 26. This is not your precise horizontal distance from the station. If you're more than a few nautical miles from the station, slant range can be considered equal to horizontal range. However, if you're directly over the station, then DME errors can be rather large. Aeroplane B's DME reads 1 nautical mile, approximately 6,000 feet, yet it is directly over the station. Be cognizant of large horizontal errors when close to the station. Position fixing with DME. Do you have to be tracking to a VOR radial to obtain DME information? Absolutely not. You need not be tracking to or from any VOR, VORTAC, or VOR/DME station to obtain your distance from that station. Simply select the VOR frequency in the DME receiver and read the DME display. DME offers several possibilities for identifying your position. Figure 27 shows several examples. Figure 27A shows an aeroplane on the 130-degree radial at 10 miles from the station. That's a very precise position fix. Figure 27B shows the aeroplane on the LCB 200-degree radial at 7 miles from the BAD VOR. Figure 27C shows the aeroplane at the intersection of two DME arcs from separate VOR stations. Use whatever combination of nav aids you like to fix your position.
With VOR and DME, it sure is difficult to get lost. But pilots still do it. A sly-thinking pilot called air traffic control and said, "Oh, hey fellas, this is 2132 Bravo. I was wondering if you folks could, help me out a little." He was lost, and ATC knew it. ATC responded with,
32 Bravo, are you lost?
He replied,
"Well, of course not. Well, I was just purchased some new navigation equipment and wanted to confirm its indication with what you have on your screen. So, how about telling me where you think I am, huh?"
No doubt about it, he was lost. If you think VOR and DME is wonderful, just wait until you read about something known as area navigation or RNAV equipment.